Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa. Basketball.
Welcome in to another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Rauf, joined as always by my co-host, Connor Hope. And this is the debut of Riley Davis as our host of the Hangout. He was on Hope and Ralph once, but he's now going to be a regular host of the Hangout as well. So, Riley, good to have you on, man.
Yeah, glad to see you all. Sorry I missed the first couple. I'll take the blame for that. Tap my chest, say my bad. But glad to be on tonight. Glad to talk a little hoops with y'all. And, of course, our fearless leader, Eli. So,
yeah, it's a hangout. It's a rotating cast. We're all going to be busy. We all have other obligations and maybe out on the road covering games during the season. May not be able to all make it, to the scheduled hangout that week. So we're going to have a good group coming through here, rotating through, making sure that we bring you the best college basketball coverage that we can. And Connor, I know that starts with a little thing we've been teasing for a while, and now it's finally coming to fruition.
Yeah, I've been growing the playoff beard. I've been teasing it the last couple of episodes, saying that there's something else big on the horizon other than just the hangout.
And not the playoff.
And it's here. Yeah, not the playoff beard. And it's here. It got announced yesterday. Heat Check CBB has partnered with Field of 68, Three-Man Weave, and Verbal Commits to put together the Almanac, the first ever Almanac preseason preview of every team in the country, and some other great content in there as well. Eli was instrumental in having that conversation with Rob and Jeff over at Field of 68. Eli, how did this come together? What can people expect from the Almanac, and kind of how excited are you that it's finally coming together for us?
Well, first off, thank you guys for having me on the show, and I'm just really excited to launch this new edition or this new evolution of this podcast and what we're trying to build here at Heat Check CBB, and really excited about the hangout. And you guys just do an excellent job of covering the sport and providing really entertaining and insightful content. So that's first and foremost. But as far as this magazine, I'm thrilled to get going on this and being able to release it and show the fans what we've been working on. But really this formed out of what we collectively worked on last fall, which was our season preview magazine, which is something that we had planned to do for months and months, and it eventually came to fruition. We released it last October, and we're really excited about the feedback on that and how it was received. And we were approached just this offseason, shortly after the Final Four, by Rob Dostler and Jeff Goodman of Field of 68 about teaming up and providing one with them and with Three-Man Weave, which just do a phenomenal job with their previews year in and year out, and also Verbal Commits, which is obviously a name brand in college basketball as well. So we're really excited, and we've put in hours of interviews and writing and research and data and everything, this and that, to really provide the most comprehensive look at the likes of Duke and Kentucky and the likes of whoever's playing in the smallest capacity gyms in America. So from really top to bottom, this sport requires so much love and care, and we're just really thrilled to present it to people who are excited to read and just can't wait to get this new season going. But tons of great info. Everyone from casual fan to an absolute diehard will be able to take something valuable away from what we've produced, and we're just really excited to unveil it to everybody.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Brian and I are both excited.
Yeah.
You can expect quotes from every head coach in the country. So it's not just us throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. We had conversations with every coach, with basically every SID in the country. We have up-to-date looks at what the rosters are, what the rotations will look like, what the starting lineups might look like, the style of play that the coaches are going to implement, who the X factors are going to be, and stuff like that. So it's a very well-informed look at college basketball, more so than some of the other publications that might just be from an outside looking in perspective, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and it's not your run-of-the-mill magazine, right? We have roughly 1,300 words on every single team in the country. focuses not just on the power conferences and say we touch on mid-majors. Everybody is covered. There are some national lists and extra content in there, Eli, but everybody is covered, I think, as thoroughly as we possibly could, and that's something I know I'm very excited about.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the things about this preview, which I've even gained just myself in doing this, is I know the teams a lot better than I would have had I just done research on my own. And there's a lot of information that you don't know until you actually talk to the head coach and the staff and the team itself, and understanding what are particular players' skill sets, what are players working on, what injuries might they have behind the scenes, all different sorts of things that ultimately have such an impact on what the teams look like come February and March when things really get rolling. So it's just a comprehensive look at every team, and we're really fortunate to get in touch with every head coach and be able to produce something really special.
Yeah, and
I was just going to add.
Go ahead, Riley.
Just that with the comprehensiveness and exhaustiveness of our previews, last year we were accused by a guy on the interwebs named Dave, a CAA fan. We don't forget it, Heat Check CBB. Implied that we were hack jobs. Well, guess what, Dave? You got Lucas Harkins covering the Colonial this year. You got Mr. Words himself coming at you with 1,300 words on every CAA team. So there will be no accusations of hack jobbing this year.
And Almanac is correct. I think we can get past the magazine thing. This is, if I do math correctly, over 800 pages of college basketball content. So much larger than a magazine, which is exciting. So you'll get your money's worth. The link for the pre-orders is down in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube. Make sure you get your pre-orders in, because you get a pretty nice, I believe, 20% discount on pre-orders between now and launch date, which is September 26th, which is also my birthday. So if you'd like to get me a birthday gift, go out and order yourself a nice copy of the Almanac, and you won't be disappointed. We won't be disappointed, and everyone will win.
Might be a baby there too. Might be a hell of a birthday for you, man.
It'll be and a nephew, so it'll be a crazy birthday for me.
Absolutely.
A nephew, a baby, a magazine, and probably a few weeks off of writing about college.
Probably.
but we're very excited about it. Again, the link's in the description if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to it via one of our regular podcast platforms, wherever you listen to your podcasts, you can get it. Just check out Heat Check CBB on Twitter. It'll be up there. Field of 68 will have it. Three Man Weave will have it. If you're a college basketball fan and you follow pretty much anything college basketball related, you'll see it on your timeline if you haven't already. But make sure you check it out on Heat Check CBB on Twitter as well. We'll get back into talking about the Almanac and some teams that we were responsible for covering that have stood out to us. But there are some national headlines that have happened in the last week. Typically don't happen really in August, this late in August at least, that we need to tackle. The first one, Connor, being the Keontae Johnson news. The Florida transfer is headed to Kansas State. We know about his health issues and the heart condition. He's reportedly been cleared to play. Jerome Tang, as new head coach at Kansas State, was at Baylor. Has some experience with heart issues, most recently Jared Butler there. If Keontae Johnson is healthy and is able to play at the level he was when he was the SEC preseason player of the year, what does this mean for Kansas State?
First off, I think it's important to temper expectations. Keontae Johnson was the 2019-2020 or 2020-2021 preseason SEC player of the year.
Yep.
If he can get back to that level, it will be great. I still think that we're looking at a person who can play at that level, but maybe 20 minutes a game. Not the full 30, pushing 30, over 30 minutes a game, which is still critical for a team like Kansas State that's trying to get back into the middle of the Big 12 pecking order, especially heading into the upcoming seasons where they're going to be competing not only against the current Big 12 minus Texas and Oklahoma, but also the likes of Houston and BYU and others. So But look, he's a fantastic wing. He can score at a pretty high level, very good IQ. That Florida team was going to be pretty good if he was healthy. And it's good to see him back on the court. It's good to see the fact that he has been cleared to play. But I think we should expect something in between of what people expect. Some people I've seen saying, look, he's never going to play because of this, which we've seen players play with heart conditions. It can be done. I've seen a lot of people bring up that preseason SEC player of the year, and that's the level he can play at, which he can, but it's a matter of how much he can do that for Kansas State while still staying safe and staying healthy. But for a school like Kansas State, which is at the bottom of the Big 12 or near the bottom of the Big 12, getting someone of that or who has the ability to play at that caliber, I think is huge.
Yeah, we're talking about Kansas State in August, and I don't think we've done that on any iteration of this podcast. So that's certainly a good sign, Riley. With regards to his impact, does it change the way you look at Kansas State with regards to the Big 12 pecking order at all?
For me, not really. I mean, I think, yeah, I actually wrote about this for the Field of 68 newsletter on Monday, just looking a little bit at like what he does well. I mean, he's pretty dynamic out of triple threat with his jab steps, getting into the paint. We got a pretty good friend, Eric Fawcett, who covers Florida and has given us some pretty good scouting reports on Keontae and what to look for there. And I think, you know, I would guess Jerome Tang's going to try to optimize that a little bit and play him more out of pick and roll than Mike White did. I think like Jerome Tang is probably going to try to emulate that 3-guard style that Baylor did, that Baylor, you know, figured out how to run it to perfection. But the only thing is, like, this Kansas State roster is still pretty makeshift. It's probably, maybe it's finalized now, but it's late August. I mean, you look at how loaded the Big 12 is in general, and pretty much every other team has had their rosters finalized since May, June at the latest. Like, all their new pieces have already had extra practice time where you're just going to, I mean, don't get me wrong, I totally understand why Kansas State did it. It's like a low risk, high reward move. And when you're Jerome Tang, it's the splashiest acquisition he probably realistically could have gotten. But yeah, I still would have them probably bottom 2 in the Big 12. I mean, maybe if like Keontae is that SEC Player of the Year level good, yeah, it's really tough to envision that, but maybe that could get them, I don't know, like seventh place in the conference or something, and give them a little bit of hope for the future, because I do think, you know, Jerome Tang will work out long term, but it's just the Big 12 is so good. It's so loaded. I mean, that's not breaking any news to anybody, but him on his own playing with TK, who's the America East transfer that they got?
Oh.
That was their other big
I don't
acquisition.
know. Rob wrote up the Big 12.
Yeah,
so.
TK Green.
It's thank you. Yeah, I couldn't tell you much about TK Green, but I know that was their other big acquisition, who went from playing in the America East to the Big 12.
Yeah, might be a rude awakening. Eli, do you think they can get out of the cellar in the Big 12? And it might just be something where this move helps build momentum for Tang's tenure at Kansas State. How do you see it?
Well, similar to what Riley said, I think a lot of things that first-year coaches need to have in their, especially at the Power 5 level, is kind of that splash to kick off their new tenure. And we saw that with G.G. Jackson at South Carolina. That's a big deal, and that's kind of a splash for your program, yes. But I mean, I do think that there is something to be said about bringing in a notable name, a player who can contribute or at least kind of add a little bit of flair to a school's first year under a new head coach. But I do think something that also needs to be brought up, which may or may not impact what this outlook looks like for Johnson in a K-State uniform, is from what Jeff Goodman reported, which was that his insurance policy, which would cover $5 million, he says that according to a source of Jeff Goodman's, that it becomes void if he plays 10 games. So I think that he may be limited to just 9 games if that becomes a factor. And so we could potentially see a situation where Keontae Johnson plays 10, 15 minutes a game for 8, 9 games, shows what he is capable of to possible pro scouts, and shows that he can compete, maintains that insurance policy, and does what he can from there. But I do think, from my vantage point, I think this move has more to do with Keontae Johnson and his future and just getting back out there and competing at a high level, more so than what it can do as far as K-State's at-large or NCAA tournament hopes, at least for what Tank's first year is considered here.
Absolutely. I think it's best of both worlds because, again, we're talking about Kansas State in late August. Jerome Tank's started his tenure, has some momentum, has some positivity. Keontae Johnson is going to get to be a focal point for the minutes that he is on the court, and you bring up a good point. We'll see how long he's on the court and how many games he's there for, but he'll get what he needs. Kansas State gets the, if not for the on-court production, at least gets the off-court promotion and momentum that they probably need. So I think this is a win-win for both sides. I don't know how big of an impact it makes outside of that, but again, for a guy in Johnson's situation, and then a program like Kansas State and a coach like Tang in that situation, I think it makes sense for both parties. The other big news that broke on Monday night was that Boise State transfer Emmanuel Acott is not going to Memphis, as we all thought. He decommitted and is now going to Western Kentucky, which creates this, I think, exciting race at the top of the Conference USA, Eli, because UAB brings a lot of people back from last year's tournament team. Western Kentucky has a good roster. This obviously leaves Memphis without a projected starter. Late in the cycle, it's going to be virtually impossible to replace him. But you covered Acott a lot in the Mountain West. What is he bringing to the table for Western Kentucky? What kind of player is he? What kind of impact can he have?
I mean, he's a massively impact player. He does so much, I think, even beyond what he produces as far as a per game stats perspective. Just does a lot to kind of be the point of attack in an offense and not being like a lead guard, so to speak. Maybe plays kind of like what you would expect out of the small ball forwards or guys who can distribute off of the wing, and just does a lot to impact winning. And I spoke with Leon Rice as part of the Almanac interviews and talked with him about the impact that Acott had and what he brought to this team. And it was just a lot beyond just production, a lot of leadership capabilities and things that he brought to the team. And I think, I mean, as much as this elevates Western Kentucky, and that is a loaded roster for any team across the country, but let alone a mid-major conference or a team out of the Conference USA, which has been so great in NCAA tournament games the last decade or so. But I do think, as you touched on, that's a pretty substantial loss for Memphis too, because this wasn't necessarily the splashy sort of offseason that we've seen from Memphis the last couple of years under Penny Hardaway. It wasn't a bad offseason by any means, but I do think that takes quite a bit of wind out of the sails out of a team that was looking like a potential at-large top 3 team in the American to maybe having a little bit more question marks on the wing. So I think it's a major add. I'd be curious to find out if we ever do why this kind of last-second move occurred. But as far as Western Kentucky is concerned, that is a loaded started 5. They have a 7'5" big man in Jamarian Sharp, who's the best shot blocker and one of the best overall bigs in the conference. It's a loaded team that has a lot going for it this upcoming season. And for Rick Stansbury, he's assembled some great rosters there, but has yet to reach the NCAA tournament. And like we've said several years now, this is probably his best opportunity to do so.
Yeah, Connor, I think you put them in the mix now with UAB at the top of Conference USA. I would consider that to be more of a toss-up now. I thought UAB was pretty clearly the top team in that conference. I have them as the 25th team in my personal poll for the preseason. But I don't know if I put Western Kentucky there, but I am now giving Western Kentucky consideration in a way that I was not before. How do you stack that race up?
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's UAB. I still think UAB is a borderline top 25 team. Definitely probably in my top 35 at a minimum. And I don't see Western Kentucky there. I think what this does, though, is it does provide a greater threat to UAB than was already there, in the sense that UAB now has to play their way, or feel like they have to play their way into an at-large bid to feel safe at all, because the chances that they can run through the Conference USA tournament have gone down, maybe not significantly, but have gone down enough that it becomes that much more important for them to win. Win a lot of games, win in the non-conference, get an at-large bid. And like Eli said, I mean, there is a much greater chance that you see a two-bid Conference USA this year than I think you would have guessed heading in. UAB, I still think, is probably a team that would have played its way into an at-large bid, and they're not really affected as a team by this at all. But it gives a little bit more flavor to what we could see in March for that tournament.
Riley, how do you look at Memphis now from an NCAA tournament perspective? I think the American Conference race was always going to be Houston and then everybody else. This only makes that point even more true. But Memphis made the tournament for the first time under Penny Hardaway last year. Their goal was to get back there this year. This is certainly a hit to those chances.
Yeah, I was somewhat prepared to be pretty in on Memphis this upcoming year with ACOT in the fold. I know a lot of people have continued to sort of lambast their point guard issues and turnover issues and think of it's more of a systemic issue than like just player specific. But I personally think Kendrick Davis should fix that, should definitely elevate them. And yeah, if it doesn't work with Kendrick Davis, then it's a systemic issue. But yeah, I was looking forward to them having two guys who can legitimately handle the rock between Kendrick and Emmanuel Acott. But I love DeAndre Williams. I think he's one of my favorite players to watch. Such an unorthodox game, the way he can pass. And, maybe without Acott, they just go back to running the offense through Williams a good bit of the time. I'm sure Kendrick will probably have like one of the highest usage rates, if not the highest usage rate in the American. But, at least with Acott being out of even with Acott gone, you still have DeAndre Williams, who's a very capable passer and just has that unselfishness that I think is probably pretty contagious to play with. And of course, bringing in KO, Akabundu, Ihiogu, my guy, to lock down the interior. I think they couldn't have found a defensive big who fits what Penny wants to do better with how he's going to get out and do those run and jumps and play like pressure defense, all of like different types of pressure and pick up full court and everything, and having a shot blocker like KO on the back end, I think is huge for them. I am curious to see if he can develop any more of his offensive game, just because I think that's what limited his role at UT Arlington. And I mean, the AAC is, not the best conference, but it's still a good bit better than the Sun Belt. So, but I think Memphis, they should be a tournament team again, probably like a 7, 8, 9 seed in that range, if I had to guess.
Throwing shit and the Sun Belt, man. I don't know. Sun Belt. I had the Sun Belt for the Almanac. The Sun Belt's gonna be pretty good this year. The top 5, 6 in that league is gonna be pretty good.
Yeah, and that gap between Memphis and probably Cincinnati as the third best team was significant enough where not having Acott doesn't make up for that gap. That gap shrinks, and the gap between Houston and Memphis grows. But I would still think Memphis is the clear pick to come in second in the standings in the American Conference.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't feel as strongly about that, of course, but I still think there's enough talent there, particularly with Kendrick Davis, for that to be the case. There's not much else really going on in the college basketball world. It's a slow time, aside from the Almanac dropping in a month. We haven't given much coverage to the mid-majors yet. There just hasn't been an opportunity to on the Hangout. So I'd like for all of us to go around and talk about some teams that we are higher on now than we were when we started doing our work for the Almanac. A lot of them coming from the mid-major ranks. Eli, you had the Mountain West. We've talked about San Diego State on here, I think, each episode already. We've decided, sorry, Riley, but we've decided that we are going to be a San Diego State podcast for the year. So why are they going to win Maui and potentially make the Final Four?
Yeah, it's a really, really good basketball team. I think on paper this is about as good as it gets for a Mountain West program or for a program of San Diego State's caliber, which is saying quite a bit. I think just the most important offseason notes in an offseason that was very, very busy for SDSU was the addition of Darion Trammell, coming over from Seattle U, and he is just such a natural, productive pick-and-roll point guard who creates on both ends of the floor as someone who can disrupt and steal passes, disrupt ball handlers, but is also just a natural floor leader. He scores at all three levels, gets to the foul line, and shoots at a really high rate. I think he is just the perfect fit for what SDSU has looked like under both Steve Fisher and Brian Dutcher, which is just a three-level point guard who can distribute, plays great man-to-man defense. I can just see him being the next great transfer guard who, to be quite honest, he doesn't have the size of Malachi Flynn, but those two have quite a few similarities. SDSU's had some really good fortunes with point guard transfers, many of whom have come up from the mid-major ranks. So you pair him with guys like Matt Bradley, who's coming back. Nathan Mensah is one of the best rim protectors in all of college basketball. SDSU is extremely high on Jaden Ledee, who sat out this past season after coming over from TCU and was with Ohio State. He could be a guy who could average somewhere close to, 12 and 7 off the bench if he isn't a starter. And I think the Aztecs probably are the odds-on favorite to lead the entire nation in defensive efficiency. They're top 2, if not top 3 this past season. I'd imagine they'd be right in the mix again, and they've only gotten better with both Trammell and Micah Parrish from Oakland, who's another guy who can stretch the floor and play good defense. And even Lamont Butler is another speedster who was top 50, top 60 in steal rate, much like Trammell. So there aren't many weaknesses on this team. I think if there is one, it's the fact that SDSU just wasn't a very good jump shooting team this past year. They had several games where they went 5-6 minutes without a basket. Their games against Boise State, I mean, I love the Mountain West Conference, but those were not easy to watch by any means. They struggled to score, and Dutcher is convinced in what we discussed that they should be much better on that end and just be a little bit more free-flowing. I think a lot of that has to do with Trammell being inserted into the lineup and having a bit of a security blink with Parrish coming off the bench, and some of the other guys like Keishad Johnson, tremendous dunker and exceptional athlete. So top to bottom, this is, I would say, a pretty clear lock as a top 18, top 20 team in the preseason AP poll, and they should very well be in the mix to at least end this long-time Mountain West NCAA tournament drought.
Darion Trammell, friend of the program. Darren, if you're listening, we'll have to have you back on to when we do our Mountain West preview. But I think the addition that you touched on, that they're going to be awesome. They're going to be better offensively, defensively. They're elite. Sorry to put words in your mouth, but we had to talk about San Diego State first. Now, who else in the Mountain West do you like?
Man,
maybe higher on than the consensus.
It's tough. I think that people are going to probably underestimate what Colorado State looks like without David Roddy. They had
Agreed.
A challenging offseason in the sense that Roddy's departure came right at the deadline, which, of course, there's nothing that you can do about it. Then they lost Jacob Jennison to a torn ACL, who isn't a known name by any means, even in Mountain West circles, but he was expected to play a pretty substantial role in the post this upcoming year. And now they're going to lean on some new cast of characters to kind of round out the front court. But I'm not ready to drop CSU from at least the at-large contention sphere. I still think that with Isaiah Stevens leading the way, he's already used to carrying a big usage. He's a career, I think, 15, 16 points per game scorer. He's been efficient his entire life. Has a really good supporting cast with John Tonje. Isaiah Rivera could be a breakout guy. I still think it's a good team. The front court definitely has some question marks, but it still is another at-large contender. But beyond that, honestly, if you go 4 through 9, it is tough to project. But even a team like, say, New Mexico, which has the most, I would say, returning production out of the entire conference with Jalen House and Jamal Mashburn, I'm convinced that they will be able to rise substantially into probably the top 5, if not top 6 in the conference, and probably be a pretty dangerous out this upcoming season. They play in the pit. That's always a tough place to play. They have a lot of offensive firepower. Some really good transfers coming in that should anchor their rotation. Their question mark, again, is kind of in the front court, as a lot of these teams are. But New Mexico, Utah State is another team that's capable of doing some damage, but it's going to be tough figuring out who's in that 4 through 9, 5 through 9 mix, which I feel like we say every year, but in the case of the Mountain West this year, it's pretty darn true.
Connor, who stuck out to you? I know you were also on the West Coast with the conferences that you covered. Anybody you came away higher on than you expected, or that you were higher on than, again, the national consensus?
I mean, I'm way higher on UC Santa Barbara. I think everyone had them as a clear favorite to win the Big West. I snuck them into my top 25 when we were doing the voting for the Almanac. You're talking about a team that brings back 4 starters. AJ Mitchell, I think, showed in his first season that, you know, he can be a star in the mid-major ranks. You know, one of those point guards that's just hard-nosed, shoots the ball adequately enough. Josh Pierre-Louis, one of the best defensive guards in the country. Miles Norris is kind of in that mold where I think he could break out and have a little bit of that Ja'Cory McLaughlin like breakout season for UC Santa Barbara. Obviously, they bring in Andre Kelly from Cal, who averaged 13 and 8 there in the Pac-12. Zach Harvey just got cleared. So they run 7 deep of legitimate, you know, guys who could start, maybe not on any program in the country, but definitely any mid-major program in the country. And that's before you get into some of their freshmen and some of the other guys that might get bigger roles this year. And that drop off from Amadou Sow to Andre Kelly, I don't think is that big a drop off, if at all. You know, they do things a little bit differently, but they are both really good rebounders, really good interior scorers. So I really like this UC Santa Barbara team. And I think we're looking at another situation in which, you know, they have the potential to get into March and knock off, you know, a 4 or 5 seed in the tournament.
They were a couple points away from doing that in 2021, weren't they?
Yeah, against Creighton.
Yeah. I had that too. Excellent. Riley, what about you? I know you dove deep into a lot of these conferences. Who's somebody that's really sticking out to you?
Yeah, so I covered the MEAC, and a team who I am really high on and really excited to see is Howard. For one, I talked to Kenny Blakeney, was just an incredible interview. Seems like just a great hang. And, you know, we cleared the air pretty quickly. He's a Dookie. I'm a Tar Heel. But listen, he started name-dropping all of his favorite places in Chapel Hill to go to when he was a student, and it won me over so quickly. I had a thought that's like, man, if Kenny Blakeney ever gets the Duke job, I will feel very morally and emotionally conflicted.
Topo had to be one, right?
Well, he actually had. He's not. He's
that
not
works
too.
first.
That was the first.
That works
name.
too.
Yep. So, It's actually my personal favorite bar too. So got good taste. But so this Howard roster is awesome. It starts with Elijah Hawkins, who's like a 5'10", 5'11", just dynamic point guard who has he has a high major handle. This dude gets wherever he wants to on the court, keeps the ball on a string. I love the concepts that Blakeney runs. It's a ton of NBA concepts that actually work for Howard. It's not just he's not just the kind of coach who's going to say, I run NBA concepts to sound cool or smart. They run a ton of ball screens, ton of dribble handoffs, a lot of concepts and transition. It's more concept based than sets. So they have Hawkins, who's kind of the straw that stirs the drink, and another guy named Steve Settle, who's this 6'9", 6'10" wing who's just a bucket. And Steve Settle, he played at DeMatha and actually has a really cool story about not seeing much playing time at DeMatha, but sort of blowing up at Howard last year. And I won't tell it on here because I might want to write a feature about it someday, so I'm not going to spoil it. I don't want anybody to take my story. But yeah, I'm really excited to see what Howard does. And I can't help but think about imagining if NIL was a thing 2 years ago and they still had McCord Maker, That's the one takeaway where I'm like, this would be a team where he actually would have good guards around him. But yeah, I think they could totally push. I don't think they'll push Norfolk State for the number one spot, like in the standings during the regular season. I think Norfolk State's going to be loaded. They bring everybody back, including Joe Bryant Jr. as the player of the year. Chris Bankston, another really solid big. But they could totally pull an upset in the tournament. They could upset Norfolk State in the tournament and get to the big dance. So, and speaking of Norfolk State, if they do end up running through the MEAC and getting the auto bid, the committee's got to stop screwing them and giving them a 16 seed. At least give them like a little 15 love, 14, 15 seed action. Like you can't be put in the Ivy League. I don't want Penn. I don't want the Penn Quakers getting a 14 seed that Robert Jones and Norfolk State deserve.
But when Colgate's
So
Colgate's ninth in the net, you got to reward it, right?
That's fine. Colgate can be one of the 14 seeds. We got three more to give away. Just give one to Norfolk State.
I have a couple notes as well. I'll run through them pretty quick. Nicholls State has won the Southland 2 years in a row. Should do it a third time this year. This is a team last year that almost beat Wisconsin at Wisconsin, hung with TCU at TCU as well. Bring back a good amount of pieces from that team. I think this could be the year they break through the tournament, and they would be a team to watch the first round upset potential, the right matchup. Iona's going to win the MAC. Sienna's going to be good too, but Jim Root pointed this out on Twitter too on Monday night. Manhattan has 7 COVID seniors on their roster. They were the oldest team in the country last year. They got older. It's absurd.
BYU?
Older than BYU. Yeah, it's insane. But Riley, you talked about the Sun Belt earlier. I want to make sure I touch on the Sun Belt because I think there are 5 teams at least in that conference that have a legitimate chance to win it and potentially win an NCAA tournament game. Georgia State is in the mix. They made the tournament last year, pushed Gonzaga for 30 minutes, brought in Jonas Hayes from Xavier, who led them to an NIT title on the interim tag. He's now the head coach there, brought in some high major transfers. The talent's there. Louisiana has always had talent. Jordan Brown's probably the best player in that league. If they stay healthy, they have a good chance to go. Same thing's true for South Alabama. Brought in Kevin Samuel from Florida Gulf Coast, who was at TCU and was the best defender in the Big 12 for a couple years. And so now you add him to the Sun Belt. And then Texas State's won it the last 2 years. Haven't won a conference tournament game in that time frame, but they've won the regular season title for the last 2 years, and they still have some talent. Terrence Johnson, their coach, he's only been there 2 years. He's won the regular season title both years. That's not a bad deal. But I am most high on James Madison. They're coming in from CAA. You might remember they beat Virginia last year and then didn't hear about them the rest of the year. That was because everybody got hurt. Everybody got hurt. Everybody's back. They bring in some good transfers. Noah Friedel from South Dakota State. I know everybody is really high on Baylor Shireman from the Jackrabbits going to Creighton. But Friedel's a really good transfer as well. JMU, I think, is going to be in that mix and could very well win the league. I think if any of those 5 teams win the Sun Belt's automatic bid, I would be very concerned about seeing them pop up next to me in my bracket if they're going to be, or if I'm a high major team. Because I think that league at the top is going to be some very, very high-level basketball.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way about the Big Sky. I mean, you have Montana State, who won it last year, won both the regular season and the tournament championship. They bring back Jabril Bello, who won Player of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year in the conference. They also have Raekwon Battle, who could be in for a big breakout with more minutes. But you also have Montana, led by a significant margin, the longest tenured head coach in the conference, in Travis DeCure. They bring in Deshaun Thomas from Colorado State, who's played in the tournament. They bring in keep Josh Bannon, who's also a really good forward for them. You've got Northern Colorado, who has the potential to have the highest scoring player in college basketball next year in Dalen Kuntz. Northern Arizona is another team in that conference. They're not going to compete for the championship, but Jalen Cone could be a top 10 scorer in college basketball next year. And then you've got Eastern Washington, They returned Steele Venters, who's one of the best 3-point shooters in the country, on the wing. One of the youngest head coaches in the country, and David Riley. Really good offensively. Their defense needs to catch up, but I think they can do it in his second year. And so they could compete for the title. And then you've got Weber State, who's in a little bit of a transition year. Coach Ray is out the door. They have, new leadership. So we'll see how they can continue that legacy that was left. But watch out for Sacramento State, because they have an insane transfer class. And I've said it before on this podcast, and I'll keep harping on it. That transfer class is so hard to project, mainly because I don't know how it's going to fit together. But on paper, you could make a strong argument that Sacramento State belongs in the top 2 in that conference. Brand new head coach, a bunch of brand new players. So there's always that bottom that can fall out. But on paper, that team is good. So the Big Sky is going to be very competitive at the top. And then for the Big West, it's basically UC Santa Barbara. But I'd watch it. I'd stay up for those Hawaii games. They've got Samuta Avea coming back after 2 years on, sitting out. Juan Munoz, who was supposed to be their starting point guard, is now healthy. He transferred in last year and then got injured, along with Avea before the season. Noel Coleman, obviously their leading scorer last year, is back. And then watch UC San Diego. You're not going to see them in the standings. They're not eligible. You're not going to see them in March. They're not eligible. But they have the best 3-point shooter in the country in Jake Kosakowski, who shot over 40% from 3 last year, which was like 1.5% higher than the next highest shooting player that qualified. So
over 40 or over 50?
He was shot like 47.3, and I think the next one that qualified was 45.9. So one of the best 3-point shooters in the country in San Diego, and no one's going to watch them because they're not eligible to play in March. But I would watch them because they can't affect the standings in the Big West. They can't affect who wins or loses the championship because none of their games count. But they've got an automatic shooter from 3.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff we only get by buying and reading the Almanac. So, again, make sure you find that link in the description if you're on YouTube or on the Heat Check CBB social channels. Make sure you check out there and pre-order your copy for 20% off. Before we get out of here, the last couple seasons, we've always ended our episodes with a bold prediction, whether it's for conferences or for the week. So I want us to look at the conferences that we had covering the Almanac and give our bold prediction. It doesn't have to be for every single one, but the one you feel strongest about for the leagues you covered. So, Eli, I'll start with you. I know you had the Mountain West and a couple others, I believe. So what's your strongest take from diving deep into those leagues?
Well, I had the Mountain West and the WAC, and the WAC is next to impossible to project because it is such a deep and loaded conference. I think people don't realize this, but the WAC had more top 90 teams in defensive efficiency than the ACC last year, and it is a league that just plays tremendous defense. Seattle U came out of nowhere last year under an interim head coach in Chris Victor to share the conference's title. They had a top 65 defense with our guy Trammell leading the point there. Obviously, he's not there anymore. But, I mean, top 5 in that conference is just so hard to project. I think the maybe interesting tidbit, I don't know if I could go as far as making a bold prediction regarding Southern Utah, but they're coming over. There's a new conference member in the ever-changing WAC. But Southern Utah has an absolutely explosive offensive skill set under Todd Simon, who's been just a tremendous head coach in revitalizing the Southern Utah program. He took over a pretty disastrous situation in a program that really had not won more than 6-7 games for several years. Even his first couple of years there, it was the same deal, but he led Southern Utah to some pretty special seasons of late, and I guess my bold prediction for them is that Tavion Jones, who is their kind of Swiss Army knife as a lanky wing who is a supreme athlete, a great scorer. He does a ton of stuff defensively. I'm convinced that he could find his way to having his name called on NBA Draft Night in 2023. If he puts together the season, I'm predicting that he will, because he is just such an elite talent. He has so many intangibles, and now that he is getting back up to his full health, Simon just loves the way that he has competed and has developed his game. I think he has the skill set, being a former Illinois transfer, to really do some special things this season and, create a lot of havoc in a WAC conference that has some pretty big name brands. New Mexico State, Abilene Christian, Stephen F. Austin. All these programs have won tournament games of late. All of them are going to be competing for the title again, but I'm really high on Southern Utah. They play kind of like what Riley alluded to, a pretty NBA-type style offense. Todd Simon has a lot of good concepts. This is a program that is on the rise, and I think Tavion Jones is the guy who sparks it all.
All right. Riley, let's hear it.
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit on the Big South. That was the other conference I covered. And I think the top 4 of that league is almost pretty set in stone. The top 3 I'm super confident in: Longwood, UNC Asheville, Winthrop. You can sort of book those 3. You kind of know what you're getting with. I mean, you know what you're getting with Griff Aldrich. You know what you're getting with Mike Morrell, and you know what you're getting with Mark Prosser, and just like that, the entity that is Winthrop. And I would throw in Gardner Webb at 4th, just because Tim Kraft finds a way to get the running Bulldogs in the top 4 pretty much every year, even though they lost some significant pieces. So for my bold prediction, it'll be Charleston Southern finishing 5th. And maybe you're like, okay, a 5th place conference finishing the Big South. That's not that bold. But listen, Charleston Southern, they finished, I think, sub 350 on KenPom last year. So it's pretty bold to say they have this meteoric rise. But I think Barclay Radeball is a guy who's proven he can win at Charleston Southern before. They've won the regular season Big South at least once, maybe twice. I want to say they won it twice under him. And that is such a tough job. That's a ridiculously tough school to win at, and to be able to win your conference multiple times. I believe in his coaching, and they have 3 freshmen who all came back. None of them hit the portal, who got reps last year and have some talent. They got a dude, a 2-guard named Claudel Harris, whose nickname is MJ. He has no M in his name anywhere. His nickname is just MJ, and I don't know about you, but that tells me he's about to be a stud. That's first team all vibes right there on the nickname alone. So give me Charleston Southern finishing 5th, baby. Hang the banner, lock it in.
I love it. I love it. Only place you can go to where you'll get a little bit of Memphis, Kansas State talk, and then we're diving deep on Southern Utah and Charleston Southern, man. Connor, let's hear yours.
I'm going to go with Northern Colorado leads the country in 3-point percentage this year. We've talked about Dalen Coons, 43% from 3. They have Matt Johnson, who's their starting point guard, coming back, 42% from 3. Dalton Connect is probably their worst 3-point shooter of guys who actively shoot threes at 37%, 36%. They bring in Riley Abercrombie, who's a 41% 3-point shooter. Their front court, Bryce Kennedy shoots 33%, but he's not really a high volume guy. Jamel Melvin, Theo Hughes don't shoot threes. And so, Langston Reynolds, their freshman, might get a lot of run at the point guard. But again, he's a very explosive athlete. He's probably not going to shoot a high volume. So you've got 4 guys, though, that shoot 37% or more from 3. And they have one of the best offensive coaches, in the Big Sky, but also one of the best offensive coaches in mid-major basketball in Steve Smiley. So I think he's going to draw up a lot of great plays to get a lot of shooters open. And we'll be seeing Northern Colorado lead the country in 3-point percentage. They're not going to lead it in effective field goal percentage because I just don't think they can finish at the rim at a high enough rate to do that. But from 3, I think they're going to be the best in the country.
All right. I'm going to go with, I think there will be a somewhat legitimate campaign for there to be a 2-bid Sun Belt. Not unlike there was the campaign for a 2-bid SoCon for a couple of years. I think we're going to see that switch over to the Sun Belt. I think they'll only get 1 in, but I think there could be a very legitimate case for 2. I'm not sure which 2 of those 5. I also think it's worth mentioning App State and Troy. App State's been one of the best teams in that league for the last 3 years, have some turnover, but talent's there. Troy had a breakthrough last year, won 20 games for the first time under Scott Cross. They're going to be good too. Top half of the league is going to be good. You're going to get some good quality net games, some good quad 2 games in league play that they didn't really get last year or have really had. If a couple teams can take advantage of some non-conference opportunities, I think a couple can do. I think we'll be looking at the potential, at least, for a 2-bid Sun Belt, which would be a lot of fun. They call it the Fun Belt for a reason.
I love it.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Heat Check Hangout. From co-host Connor Hope and Riley Davis, I want to give a special shout out to Heat Check CBB CEO Eli Boettger for joining as well. Appreciate you all for listening and watching. We'll be back next week. We'll start our conference preview series next week, so make sure you're tuned in for that. We'll talk to you again next time.
Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.